Michael was surprised. This was the first time he'd ever heard that the first competition was going to be an archery competition. Archery? He asked out loud. And a few meters away from him, he heard a conspicuous cough. Ahem, Jadon said in a whispered tone. The Purveyor werewolf tribe has been chosen to be the first to showcase their competition. And they have issued a competition of the bows. Pleasantly surprised, Michael nodded to himself. As it turned out, Chief Lupin had nothing to worry about. The brown-blood werewolf chief had been blowing up his phone recently, talking about his worries for the competition. But, with Shiina with them, the competition was all but settled. Archery, huh? How is Shiina? Yuna asked. You know how she is. Overbearing, fiercely loyal, and intimidatingly capable. Yuna laughed at his description. Hee. Then that means that I already know you'll win the archery competition. Congrats. What? Oops. Jadon forcefully closed his mouth, having been surprised after eavesdropping in their conversation. He tried not to, but he was far too curious about what the two were talking about. Excuse me, but did you say that my new friend here will win the archery competition? As far as I know, the Pureview tribe has shown themselves as having skills rivaling even that of the elves. How can you be so sure that Kyo will win? It hasn't even happened yet. Jadon's curiosity for his friend burned through his eyes. Yuna turned towards him. Well, Kyo here has a tendency of winning things over. Then, with a whisper under her breath, Yuna spoke softly. I know about it especially, she said, holding her chest. What was that? Michael asked. Yuna flashed him an exasperated look, a mixture of amusement and irritation. Then, she playfully pushed his cheek away. Jadon, watching this, realized that the relationship between the two must have been much closer than he initially thought. This made him even more fervently curious as to the nature of their closeness. And more, who was Kyo? He wasn't the only one. The 5 conglomerates on the front tables all couldn't help but look at Yuna as if she was a completely different person. Felt like she was. This was a facet of her personality that they had never seen before. They didn't even think the infamous Ice Queen of the North was capable of such emotions. It was a truly strange sight. With the lunar celebrations commencing, it is only natural that we discuss in length about its details, said the werewolf presenter. Then, he turned to look at the 5 conglomerate youths right in front of him. Gabriel, would you like to tell everyone the good news? The blonde-haired, debonair genius of the Vanderbilt family walked up to the podium with a confident stride. The 4 other conglomerates around him were unsurprised, as if they knew this would happen from the start. What's happening? He asked, but it seemed that even Jadon didn't know. Thankfully, Yuna knew exactly what was happening. The conglomerates are finally acknowledging the importance of New Sparta, she said. Jadon remained with a deadpan look on his golden retriever-faced mask. Huh? But before Yuna could explain, Gabriel finally reached the stage and faced the crowd of expectant people in the ballroom. Then Gabriel removed his mask. Instantly, the girls swooned, and even the men started to feel a little bit intimidated. Gabriel was a good-looking man with a sharp jaw, free-flowing and slightly curly blonde hair, and a smile that seemed to make him look like a Greek god. There's no need for that anymore, Gabriel said, chuckling. Let me introduce myself to everyone. I am Gabriel Vanderbilt, and I was sent here by my grandfather to oversee what was happening in New Sparta. Everyone aside from the conglomerates turned to look at each other, confused. They mumbled their guesses, but was soon silenced as Gabriel continued to speak. The 5 conglomerates have decided, he said, pausing, that the results of what happens in New Sparta will directly correlate to the promotion. As soon as that word was said, promotion, the whole ballroom suddenly turned silent. It drew a deep and ruminating breath upon everyone who heard it. Michael could feel everyone looking up at Gabriel with desire in their gazes. They wanted that promotion. That promotion, no way, Jadon gasped. Really? There's no freaking way. Yuna nodded. It's real. Michael was the only one who was left clueless. Promotion? What's that? Jadon then looked at him as if he was a kid asking what an alphabet was. It was the most basic thing that he should have known from the very start. Promotion. Do you not know about the Golden 500? Now that was a term he hadn't heard in a long while. In truth, after establishing himself in Metropolis, he didn't care that much anymore about the Golden 500 ranking. There was no difference to him if he was ranked 400 or 200. It was all the same to him as long as he could sell what he wanted to sell. What about it? Well, the Golden 500 is very important in the upper echelons of society. It's what decides whether you are able to advance to the rest of the country or not. Michael didn't understand. What did the Golden 500 ranking have to do with expanding territory? Yuna then explained. Ranking in the top 5 will grant a company the privilege to be called a global conglomerate. Now, the problem now is how to get that ranking. The best and most sensible way to climb up is through the slow and eventual expansion of a company. This takes decades. For most, this isn't enough. That's why there's a second way to get the ranking. And that is to challenge someone of a higher rank. If you defeat them, you'll take their place in the rankings. But it's not that simple, Jadan interjected. To even challenge someone of a higher rank, you'll also have to be a high ranker yourself. To put it bluntly, no one in New Sparta can challenge those upper echelons as of yet. Michael was surprised to hear that. Right now, the current highest ranking company in New Sparta has to be Alaric Goldstone. The last time he heard it, they were ranked inside the top 200. For reference, Michael remembered the Reborn company's ranking to be in the 300s. And even though their company had advanced and expanded their influence far more than when they first received that ranking, it still hadn't changed all this time. He hadn't wondered why because he didn't care all that much. But now he knew. According to what he heard from Yuna and Jadan, simply advancing one's commercial influence wasn't enough to actually climb up the rankings. They theoretically could, but that would take years, decades even, they said. The reason why the Reborn company hadn't moved at all beyond the 300th spot these past few months was because he hadn't actually challenged anyone for their rankings. This would have been the fastest way to advance. He just didn't know it. And in retrospect, it made sense. After all, it had only been less than 3 years since the Reborn company was actually first established. In the rankings' eyes, his company was still at its infancy. He had the potential, but none of the teeth required for the higher rankings. This made him have another perspective onto the actual scale of the conglomerates and the upper echelon. If the top 200 wasn't considered to be a part of them, then what was? Wait, if Alaric's company can't challenge the upper echelon because his ranking is too low, then how can he advance? Jadan excitedly pointed at Gabriel. That's what he was talking about. Promotion. This is another way for a company to enter the upper echelons. Oh my God. This will actually change the game. But it will make New Sparta a lot more competitive at the same time. As Jadan began to go off on his talkative tangents, Yuna turned to Michael and explained. A promotion is basically a ticket that allows a company to reach the upper echelons. Not metaphorically, but physically. They'll be allowed to enter into the Upper Queens region, where all the conglomerates and other world-class companies have established their main residences. In short, this was a place where the 1% elites lived their whole lives. The quality of life there was heads and shoulders above even the elites of New Sparta. High society wasn't unique there. It was standard. If a smaller company were to enter into that place, they would be able to flourish on their very bountiful meadows. Even the crap there would seem like gold to them. It would be like a shark born in the wild, suddenly finding himself in a bountiful pond filled with easy meals. Of course, it wasn't that easy. Those goldfishes were probably a lot stronger than the shark, but the analogy still stood just based on the opportunities found on the pond. Even Michael found himself getting excited at the thought. If he had the opportunity to finally advance to the Upper Queens region, he would be one step closer to his dream. And that was to establish comfort in the world. So the promotion allows a company to enter the top 100 ranking? Yuna shook her head. Not exactly. They'll just be given special permission to operate in the upper echelons. But they won't be given the ranking. That's based on whether they can obtain it on their own. If they can't retain their position in the upper echelons after that opportunity, then they're not meant to be there in the first place. This promotion could either be a gift or a curse. If a company had the ability to actually contend with the upper echelons, then this promotion was a literal ticket that fast-forwarded them into the spotlight. But if they weren't ready, then it would only push them further down. It was basically a litmus test for companies for whether they had it or not. It being the X factor that allowed a company to transcend the normal. Sir Gabriel, is that true? If we perform well, will we gain a promotion sanctioned by the Vanderbilt family themselves? And before he could answer, Cedric answered for him. Yes, that promotion will be sanctioned by all conglomerates, he clarified. This sent the whole ballroom into another excited murmur. Somehow, this big deal became an even bigger deal. Having all 5 conglomerates sanctioning a promotion meant that their ascension to the upper echelons was practically all but confirmed. Promotions worked by having one upper echelon company putting forth a proposition that the other upper echelons must agree to. For example, if a conglomerate voted for Alaric's company to have a promotion, that meant that all 100 companies in the top 100 ranking had to vote if they agreed or not. The votes must be more than half. It sounded easy, getting 50% of the votes, but it wasn't always guaranteed. According to what Michael heard from murmurs all around him, it seemed like only 2 companies had ever been given a successful promotion in the last 10 years. And that was out of 20. But if this promotion was sanctioned by all 5 conglomerates, then practically every company would be obliged to vote yes. After all, it was never a good idea to go against the 5 entities at the top of the world. Yes, you all heard it correctly. The conglomerates have issued their interest in New Sparta. They are willing to invest in it. But of course, to ensure that this promotion will be given to those who are deserving, our families and companies have decided to send us to check. This sent a confused look on everyone's faces. Sir Gabriel, do you mean? Gabriel nodded, his dashing hair flowing. Yes, we will be participating in the competitions of New Sparta. This sent a lot of mixed reactions within the crowd. How could they possibly win against someone from the conglomerates themselves? The conglomerates were not only a lot more talented, but they had a lot more resources to build from compared to even the fortunate ones here in the lower Queens region. Sure, the conglomerates probably weren't going to send the most talented geniuses of their company, but even the normal employees among them could be considered as paragons here in New Sparta. Because of that, many were immediately dismayed, thinking that they were not going to have any chance of competing for the promotion after all. But there were others who thought differently. People like Alaric, Aerith, Bobby, and all the other elites of this generation were more excited rather than worried. After all, this was the only chance they were going to get to practice against someone of that level. This would be a good gauge to test how they were compared to the conglomerates, allowing them to know how much more they needed to improve if they wanted to compete at that level. Not only that, but this was a chance for them to sharpen their swords. Alaric specifically was considered to be at the very top of the geniuses here in New Sparta. Although a prestigious title, this meant that he had completely outgrown this place. He found that because there wasn't that much competition around him, he wasn't able to improve at a pace that he was comfortable with. If he stayed stagnant, he estimated that it would take him a century before he was able to compete against the conglomerates. But with new competition, new blood challenging him for the top spot, he'd be galvanized to finally improve. Just then, his thoughts flashed back to a certain golden-haired kid. Michael. He was the only one who could properly challenge him. The memory of his nascent armor being stopped by someone at the 4th stage of body formation was still fresh in his mind. And somehow, that kid was able to transcend the stages of cultivation and show a strength that rivaled his. He went beyond even his own age, his face and body transforming into someone more mature and adult-like. Just the thought of that moment made Alaric's heart beat with excitement. He could feel his mind aching for improvement. Michael would have been a perfect partner for practice, a whetstone to sharpen his power. However, Michael was far too young. It had been a few months since that eventful auction, so Alaric guessed that Michael had probably advanced to the 5th stage. But knowing his penchant for surpassing people's expectations, Alaric guessed that Michael probably reached the 6th stage. Still, it would take Michael a decade until he reached the nascent spirit realm if he wanted to truly build a good foundation for his diva. So, he wasn't a good opponent for Alaric yet. Gabriel, on the other hand, was someone that would become the perfect stepping stone. The man was at the peak of the 9th stage, just a half step away from the nascent spirit realm. But Alaric knew. Their effective strength was actually in the nascent spirit realm. These geniuses from the conglomerates always had something up their sleeves, something that gave them an extreme advantage despite their lower cultivation. If he were to rank everyone in the room, the 5 conglomerates stood at the top, while he was just right below them. The only one here who he wasn't sure about was this enigmatic figure called Kyo. The first competition that we will be joining is the archery competition set by the Purveyor tribe. Of course, to make it fair, me and the other 4 before you won't participate in the competitions that are below our levels. Our companies will be sending representatives to participate on our behalf, Gabriel continued. The competitions in New Sparta were always divided into different groups. For example, this archery bout was separated into 2, the lower and the higher division. The lower division consisted of magnetics who were in the 1st to 5th stage of the body formation cultivation. Usually, this was where companies pitted their younger generations against each other. The higher division, on the other hand, consisted of 6th to 9th stage magnetics. This was to showcase the current and future potential of a company. Championships for both divisions were very sought after. That will be all, Gabriel said, bowing to everyone in the ballroom. I wish you all good luck. We await your ascension to the upper echelon. Once he was done with his speech, Gabriel went back down the steps and rejoined the other conglomerate youths. The werewolf presenter, on the other hand, instructed everyone to have a pleasant evening before walking back to the dark wall behind him. Then, the curtains descended down from the ceiling as he left. Of course, the rest of the soiree was no mere pleasant evening. It was very eventful, to say the least. Gabriel's announcement was a catalyst for everyone in the ballroom to start networking with each other. There were all sorts of alliances being made at the same time in the hopes that they could empower themselves before the eventual archery competition commenced. They didn't have much time, though. After all, tomorrow was the official start of the competition. The only thing that they could do today was to make some trades about equipment, armors, and weapons. Michael had no need for any of those, so he just kept to his seat, entertaining Yuna. She was quite tender today. The entire time that Michael was engrossed in the announcements, he would see Yuna staring at him from the corner of his eyes. She had her elbow on the table, her hand supporting her tilted head. Then, she would just look at him. Michael wasn't used to this at all, making him feel awkward. Is there something wrong with my face?" he asked her. She shook her head, chuckling as she did so. "Yep, you're wearing a mask, dummy." She sighed, keeping her gaze staring right at his eyes beyond the mask. Then, she laid her head on her arm on the table. "I wish I could see your face right now. When did the archery competition start? Tomorrow, right?" Then why did Michael suddenly feel an arrow piercing through his heart? Somehow, Yuna's words sent him into a complete spiral that made his brain into extreme overdrive. Take into account, his brain had been bifurcated 500 times to accommodate for all the mini-drones that he created. But now that they were used up to buy the items he had in his emporium, those 500 divisions in his mind were now unoccupied. This meant that his brain now worked 500 times faster and more efficiently than a normal human. This was an unexpected outcome for buying his mini-drones. And he thought that this little ability would have come in handy whenever he was faced with a problem that needed a lot of brain processing power. But he would have never expected that his brain would get put to the test at this moment. He just couldn't understand what was happening with Yuna. She was very affable and amiable every time that he met her, but somehow, she was different today. She seemed to be glowing with a shine that was directed exactly towards him like a spotlight. And to be honest, it was quite blinding. He might even dare say she even looked affectionate towards him. But perhaps that was just the way she goes whenever she reunited with a friend. He didn't know. Global superstars lived a completely different life from normal people, after all. "So?" Yuna asked. So, aren't you going to ask me something?" Michael was confused. Was there something he was supposed to say? Even though he had nothing to ask her, the gentle and the bewitching tone she said those words made him scramble through his mind just to say something. How have you been?" Yuna snorted, not expecting that kind of response. But even though most people would see that as unbecoming of a lady, especially one of Yuna's esteemed presence within the upper echelon, Michael thought that she actually looked really cute. Not that silly. It's about the archery competition, she said after composing herself. What about it? And then, Yuna suddenly straightened her posture and crossed her arms on her chest. And even though Michael couldn't see her face, he could tell that she was doing her best to do a pouty face. Humph, she said, exhaling with a lot of disappointment. Then, she turned facing away from Michael, clearly no longer wanting to talk to him until he realized what he did wrong. Michael was in a complete state of confusion. He didn't even know what he did wrong. He had a lot of powers, some even defying reality itself. But he didn't have a mind-reading psychic ability. How would he know what she wanted from him? Was this what other people meant when they said that women were hard to understand? They were creatures of mystery, hot and affectionate in 1 second, and suddenly cold and indifferent the next. Ahem. Michael turned around, seeing Jadon once again conspicuously coughing to get his attention. Biter, Jadon whispered. Huh? Michael asked, completely unable to understand what he said. Jadon exasperatedly shook his head before walking over to Michael to directly whisper to his ear. I think what Miss Yuna was trying to say is that she's waiting for you to ask her to become your arbiter. Michael's eyes widened, finally understanding why Yuna was so mad. She wanted him to ask for her help for the Reborn company. After all, there was a reason why Montgomery's held a special place in the upper echelons of the world. Even though they weren't companies and had no commercial value at all, they still stood at the same places that the conglomerates stood. Some would even say that they were even more important than the conglomerates. After all, they were the only people in the world who could enforce the rules and propriety that everyone had to follow. Montgomery's had a special ability called arbitration. They had the power to create a sanctum. These were completely different spaces in reality that were very similar to pocket dimensions. Except, a sanctum was something that could be completely changed to whatever one so desired. The physical rules of a sanctum could be changed at will, making it perfect for a sanctum duel. When two parties agreed to a duel, they would both decide upon its parameters. This included the reward in which they were playing for, as well as the neutral territory in which they would duel. That was what a sanctum was for. It allowed for the arbiter to create a completely neutral environment for both parties so that there would be no hijinks or anomalies that would give one or the other an unfair advantage. Montgomery arbiters are extremely sought after, Jadon whispered. A good one is impossible to find. Even the upper echelons struggle to get a good arbiter to their side. But perhaps the one most needed was none other than Miss Yuna herself. She was mentored by the venerable Zir Montgomery herself. In fact, that was one of the reasons why many wanted to be friends with Yuna. Her arbitration could mean the difference between a win or a loss. However, of course, since she was Zir's prodigy, no one dared to come near her. No one was worthy enough. That was why Yuna seemed disappointed in Michael. She wanted to be the Reborn company's official arbiter. Yet he didn't even ask. He didn't even look like he had any intention of doing so. Even conglomerates would grovel at her feet to ask her to become their arbiter. Here she was, offering her services to him, yet he didn't even seem interested at all. Michael, after finally realizing his mistake, turned to face Yuna. Sorry, I forgot about that, he said. Yuna, can you please become my arbiter? Humph, she breathed, turning even further away from him. You'll have to do something for me if you now want me to become your arbiter. Is there anything I can do? He asked her earnestly. Yuna looked at him, still undecided if she was going to go easy on him or not. Eventually, she turned to look at him with a look of victory and elation. I know. You'll give me an all-you-can-do ticket. A what? If you give me that coupon, then you can't say no to me for a single day. If I want you to say that I'm beautiful, then you'll have to say that no matter what. Michael tilted his head. But you don't need that ticket for me to say that you're beautiful. You already are. Yuna froze. Michael's unexpected compliment left her completely speechless. She felt her cheeks blushing, her heart rate spiking to abnormal levels. She'd heard literally millions of compliments back in her previous life, and probably a million more in this one. And she never really felt that good when she received it. However, Michael's simple words felt like an arrow sneakily shooting through her chest. Whatever. Then, She crossed her arms on her chest, her head turned away from Michael and trying her best not to make eye contact with him. You're not getting away that easily. You can't sweet-talk your way out of this one, mister. Michael raised his hands in defeat. Okay, he chuckled. Somehow, he didn't feel all that bad with this. Just then, they heard the sound of silence suddenly overcome the entire ballroom. Then footfalls. Michael turned around and saw the 5 conglomerates approaching them from the side. Yuna, care to introduce us to your friend? Neytiri said, immediately approaching Yuna and hugging her from the back. Oh right. Kyo, these are my friends from back when we were in school, Yuna introduced. Immediately, a blonde-haired urbane and handsome man approached Michael, giving out his hand for a shake. Gabriel Vanderbilt. Pleasure to meet you, he said. Michael returned his greeting with a courtly shake, matching his solid grasp. He could tell that Gabriel was curious about him. He could feel the prodding in his ability power, like a gentle push to see how strong his foundation was. Inspection magic detected. Automatic rejection in place. Gabriel's scan ended up as useless as cold water on a winter's night. He sensed nothing around Kyo's body. Literally. In his eyes, Kyo was nothing more than a normal human, with a normal beating heart. But he knew that was not true. He could feel ability power from Kyo, no matter how slight it was. The fact that Kyo could hide his own cultivation from him, a peak 9th stage body formation cultivator, meant that Kyo must be of a similar strength or even greater. This earned a look of shock from the handsome Gabriel, not expecting such a strong reaction. Of course, Michael reciprocated the action. He'd long used his drone to peer through Gabriel's actual cultivation and powers. Gabriel Vanderbilt. Realm, peak 9th stage. Ability power, inexorable light. He wields the power to bend his own incandescent light. His brilliance is malleable, allowing him to create any object of his desires out of pure light. Protection, UNC, feline brightness armor set. Gabriel put his hands together in penance. You'll have to forgive me for snooping on you. I just got really curious, you see, about the man willing to. Neytiri immediately threw her shoe at her man, making him keel over and fall into the ground. I'm sorry for him, Neytiri said, before giving another glare at Gabriel. That was a stare implying that there would be no second warning. Michael waved off her concerns, while taking this chance to see through Neytiri's powers. Neytiri. Realm. 9th stage body formation. Ability power. Desert construction. She is able to create monolithic desert structures out of anything she touches. Protection. Hieroglyphic obelisk armor set. While he was busy inspecting Neytiri's power, 3 more figures appeared before him, each one prompting a window to appear containing all their essential information. Alexis Oscorp. Vera. Cedric Goldstone. The first 3 were the same as Neytiri, having the same base 9th stage body formation cultivation. Only Cedric was in the peak 9th stage. The fact that there was a distinction between them probably meant that there was an actual difference between those only in the 9th stage and those already just a half step away from the nascent spirit realm. Now that I think about it, it's been a long time since I've increased my cultivation. The last time he tried it, the Godforge pieces refused to enter his chest. For the first time, this enigmatic and divine-like metal had repelled away from him. But he expected it. He'd been warned that advancing too fast was never ideal. It had only been a few months since he advanced to the 7th stage after all. Now, for most people, those few months were entirely too short. They'd need half a year at least before they're going to think about advancing. But Michael was different. He'd experienced far too much for an ordinary cultivator. He faced off against tens of magnetics all at the same time, and killed them all. They had artifices instead of Godforge pieces, but their effective strength didn't differ that much from the real thing. He also had a brief, but very dangerous encounter against a nascent spirit piece. For God's sake. Not only that, but that piece belonged to the Grandmaster, someone that Katarina even feared. In short, he definitely had enough experience to finally advance to the next stage, and hopefully the next one after that. Now, he just needed the Godforge pieces. Fortunately, he'll definitely be able to get the money to buy them. The elves and the dwarves were begging him to take on more phone orders. He wanted to, but the fact that he hadn't even delivered a fraction of what he was supposed to deliver made him hesitate. Unfortunately, he didn't know where he was going to buy the Godforge pieces. Well, at least that's what his new friend was for. Michael leaned in to Jadon and asked him a question. Chim. Jadon popped up from the crowd like a dog. His golden retriever mask almost made him look exactly like the real thing. Is there anywhere I can purchase Godforge pieces? Nodding, Jadon answered, yes. Now usually, Godforge pieces couldn't be purchased wholesale like some kind of commodity. It's only purchased from one company to another, exchanging $1 for Godforge pieces whenever they need one or the other. However, you are in luck. There has been an explosion of Godforge sales quite recently. It seems that more people need Sudrops these days. I mean, who would blade them? Upgrading your armor or weapon was a limitless ordeal. You can arm yourselves to the bone if you wanted to. Godforge pieces, although giving you the possibility to increase your cultivation, can only be used very infrequently. Like once a year kind of deal. Now normally this wouldn't be a problem. Hoarding Godforge pieces could never become a wrong choice. But right now, competition was tense in New Sparta. They needed all the strength they could muster in the shortest amount of time possible. Of course, if they just recently upgraded their cultivation, then they had no use for their Godforge pieces. It was much better for them to sell theirs for Sudrops, which would give them an incremental but noticeable boost. There is one company in New Sparta who is selling as many Godforge pieces as they could in exchange for $1 or Sudrops, Jadon revealed. And they're an up-and-coming company. I dare say, one that could one day reach the upper echelon themselves. There was a proud look on Jadon's face right now. Not only that, but his golden retriever mask was frozen in time, looking like he was eternally asking for some recognition or some dog treats. It wasn't hard to guess why. Are you part of that company? Yes. Jadon grandly answered, taking everyone's attention. Then, he took this opportunity to look at the 5 conglomerates near his table. It is an honor to meet every single one of you. I hope that we can get along. I am Jadon Thunderfoot, from the Thunderfoot Company, hailing all the way from Bonacore Town. And surprisingly enough, this gathered some shocked reactions from some of the crowd. Thunderfoot? He's from that company? We just bought a few kilos of Godforge pieces from them a few days ago. They're chock full with orders. I heard about them too. They're selling Godforge pieces at a commensurate rate. I think they're planning on selling all they have on hand. After hearing this, Michael was surprised. Even in the special circumstances of New Sparta, most, if not all, companies would only sell off the very least of their Godforge pieces. The ones that they absolutely don't need anymore. At most, that would be 10 to 20 kilograms. Any more than that, and they're basically wasting their potential. They'd still need Godforge pieces no matter what. Yes, you heard that right, folks. If you have any need for Godforge pieces, you can simply come to us. No matter if it's 10 kilograms or 100 kilograms. We're available all week. Most people would treat the 100 kilograms as hyperbole. But judging from the numerous stories around the ballroom depicting many people buying Godforge pieces, all combining to reach 50 kilograms already, it didn't seem all that far-fetched. The fact that he had so much to sell meant that they probably had even more in stock, so much more in excess than what they needed. This earned him the slight shock reaction from the conglomerates, which Jadon relished. He furtively looked to his side, wanting to see if Aerith was looking at him interacting with all of these big shots. Well, my dog-looking friend, if we are ever in need of Godforge pieces, then we shall seek your help, Gabriel said to Jadon. Meanwhile, as all of this was happening, Neytiri pulled Yuna to the side and the two started a whispered conversation. Hey Yuna, who is that guy? Is he the special person you talked about? Neytiri said in a teasing tone, almost tickling her to the side. Yuna immediately looked towards Michael, who, fortunately, was still busy talking with the others to notice their conversation. Don't talk so loud, she hushed. So? Is he? With another furtive glance at Michael, Yuna nodded. Kaya. With Neytiri's teasing, Yuna lowered her head in embarrassment. But wait, I remember you telling me that his special person is your fiancé, right? Yuna nodded, pursing her lips. Does your grandmother know about this? In truth, The arranged marriage between Yuna and Michael was done away from her grandmother's permission. It was due to the two families, Michael and Yuna's parents, having a good relationship with each other that led to that arrangement. But once Yuna grew up and showed her extraordinary talents, Zir Montgomery began to treasure her like a diamond. Yuna's parents, thankfully, hadn't told Zir at that point. However, due to a certain event, one that pertained to when a company got obliterated off the face of the earth for proposing an arranged marriage for Yuna, Yuna's parents decided to annul their arrangement with Michael and his parents. It was a way for them to be protected from Zir's wrath. After all, she would eventually find out the truth sooner or later. And that was supposed to be it. But as fate would have it, Yuna eventually met up with her ex-fiancé and developed special feelings for him. That was actually the main reason why she went back to the Montgomery estate in the first place. She wanted to settle things so that she and Michael could go on unbothered without having all of that baggage from the unsolved arranged marriage. If she advanced in her cultivation enough, even her grandmother won't be able to say anything about her decisions. Of course, she didn't say any of this to Michael because she didn't want him to know about it yet. Eventually, the soirée slowly came to a close. The party then moved outside, to the mouth of the cave where the moon was still brightly shining down on them. Even at that point, many people were still trying to make conversations, hoping to get one last alliance before the party ended. Meanwhile, those who were already confident of their company's strength left immediately, choosing to prepare for the upcoming archery tournament. They were very few. Michael remained till the end because he was still waiting for Lady Farron. Yuna decided to wait with him, which he was thankful for. The conglomerates, on the other hand, were waiting for some other reason. The adult soirée is still currently ongoing, and we have some important business to discuss with a few of them, Gabriel explained. And it seems that they didn't have to wait long. Out from the darkness of the cave's mouth, they heard the sounds of footfalls echoing outwards. A few seconds later, many figures began to bask in the moonlight's glow. Those that remained from the soirée couldn't help but draw a deep breath. Such grand figures. Exiting the cave, they saw chiefs of the werewolf tribes, royal blood vampires, merman leaders, elven bosses, and even the elusive draconians were there. Forgot connections within the soirée. If they could get an audience with at least one of those important beastfolk leaders, then they could advance their company well ahead of others. Gabriel Vanderbilt slowly approached the imposing beastfolk figures, giving them a courtly bow. Some of the figures within them immediately recognized the blonde-haired man. A Vanderbilt, one of the werewolf chiefs, said, "It is an honor to have the conglomerates participate in our tradition." It wasn't long before Gabriel was approached by several other figures, most of which were from the werewolf tribes. One could tell that they were really interested in the Vanderbilt name. The four other conglomerates were recognized as well, but as with Gabriel, the beastfolk leaders were more interested in the organizations behind them and their surnames, rather than their first. But as all of this was happening, an extremely curious thing happened. A few figures walked past the five conglomerates, not even giving them a single glance. One of them was a mermaid princess, the other was an elven chief, the next a werewolf chief, and the last one a royal blood vampire. It wasn't long before they arrived in front of a certain lion-masked youth named Kyo. "I didn't expect all of you to be here," Michael said to them, seeing his motley group of allied friends. "And missed the chance to strengthen my connections much more than my brother? You're underestimating me," said Princess Octavia, her tentacled head tilting towards him with bemusement. "Kyo, you didn't tell me you were acquainted with a merman princess, an elven leader, and a vampire," said Chief Lupin, his excitement through the roof. Being part of such a diverse and powerful group of allies only strengthened his tribe's position much more than before. "It has been a long time, Sir Kyo," said Lilith, the blonde-haired and stunning vampire with a striking resemblance to Kuno, the vampire progenitor. Shocks and gasps once again rang out in the open forest. Despite being in the presence of the five conglomerates, an unknown figure named Kyo took the spotlight. He wasn't just acquainted with one beastfolk leader, not even two or three, but four. He had a connection with every beastfolk race aside from the Draconians, which admittedly was the hardest thing to do, so it wasn't that surprising. Still, no one, not even the legacies, had such an extensive list of acquaintances. Whoa, how does he know all of them? Is he allied with those beast folks? Who is that guy? Look at how the royal blood vampire looks at him. The first three beastfolk leaders treated Michael with the same respect as they would an actual acquaintance, and even as a friend. However, Lilith, a prominent royal blood vampire, treated Michael with a little bit more reverence than most. Now, vampires were more religious than most beastfolks, with their life goal centering on disinterring their buried theology. So, the fact that she looked at Kyo with reverence meant an even greater deal. For some people who were in the know, this was perhaps the most surprising thing of all. Kyo, I didn't know you were such a big shot too, Jadun quietly screamed. Yuna didn't seem all surprised, and even looked proud of him. The conglomerates were surprised too, of course. They looked at Kyo with shock and understanding. They finally got why he was able to attract the attention of someone like Yuna. Michael then turned to Lady Farron. Did you see him there? She shook her head. I thought he'd be at the party, but… Just before she could finish her words, everyone suddenly heard the sounds of wings flapping above the sky, followed by a huge gust that disturbed the quiet trees in the night. Everyone turned their heads just in time as a red dragon descended into a cluster of trees in the near distance, breaking and splintering wood in the process. Its giant and imposing features soon diminished, as Michael saw in real time how the dragon's wings shrunk into 5-fingered limbs, its scales receding inwards and revealing pale, hairless skin. In a few seconds, the dragon transformed into a red-haired human. A drunk human. As soon as the draconian received his legs, he began stumbling and lurching forward as if he was inebriated. Correction. He was drunk. Michael could smell the strong scent of alcohol as the draconian got closer and closer. Hiccup, I didn't come too late, did I? As this red-haired draconian came stumbling near the mouth of the cave, Michael heard a few murmured discussions around him that confirmed his suspicions. That's the infamous Romeo Flameheart. I didn't think he'd come. The elusive eccentric. For someone with such an important background, he sure does like to never show up in big meetings. So that's Romeo Flameheart. As the infamous red-haired draconian came stumbling into the scene, he truly gave off the mien of a besotted figure, either through alcohol or through infatuation. Michael didn't know. This guy is an important figure? Michael muttered to himself. He knew that Romeo held the second antique, hence why he was important to Michael. But it seemed that there was another reason why he was popular within everyone's circle. It definitely wasn't because he could walk straight, that's for sure. The guy was crossing his legs with every step. But just as he came closer to Michael, Romeo suddenly stopped in his tracks. Then, he raised his head, sniffing something in the air, and immediately his face turned serious. The drunken stupor in his countenance was washed away, making him sober in an instant. Then, his head quickly swiveled towards Michael. No, not him. Towards the one next to him. Towards Lady Farron. Then, his figure suddenly disappeared, blurring in Michael's eyes, a feat that only those in the nascent spirit realm could achieve. Then, with a gust on Michael's face, Romeo reappeared beside him, his body bowing in a perfect 90-degree structure. He had his hands outstretched, begging, yearning for Lady Farron to finally take it in turn. I knew I smelled perfection, he muttered, his words no longer slurring. Lady Farron, my shy flower, the girl of my dreams. It is my lifelong pleasure to finally see you in front of my eyes. Michael was completely shocked. For someone who looked like a completely besotted and intoxicated fool, the guy could really make an eloquent and impassioned plea like no other. He was living up to his namesake, that's for sure. You don't know the joy and glee that you have bestowed upon me when you wrote that letter. Finally, all of my unrequited courting has borne fruit. Lady Farron, can I finally take your hand in marriage? Lady Farron, the subject to all of this fervent adoration, was completely unsure of what to do. She looked towards Michael, mouthing the words, I thought you told me he only wanted my bloodline. Michael could only chuckle awkwardly. It seemed that Lyra was right from the very beginning. Romeo was after Lady Farron romantically. Ahem, Sir Romeo, this is Kyo. He is part of the reason why I wanted to speak with you, Lady Farron said. redirecting the conversation to steer away from the awkwardness. Romeo turned towards Michael. "Ah yes, the man I owe everything in my life to." Then, with extreme speed, Romeo lunged at Michael and took him into a big hug, making him stagger backwards with a few steps. "Another one," Jadon couldn't help but shout. His visceral reaction was mirrored by the other people watching from a near distance. Now, it seemed that Kyo was acquainted with all 5 beast folks. And if they heard it correctly, Romeo just said that he owed everything in his life to Kyo. This wasn't just a simple alliance. This was far more than that. Michael was a bit burdened by Romeo's heavy-handed hug, but he didn't hate it. "A thanks? Of course. You are the reason why I am given a chance to make my beloved realize that we are meant to be together." Lady Farron opened her mouth, about to say something, but chose not to in the end. "Sir Kyo is also a friend of ours," she said, "and he would like to take a look at your antique. I know that you are trying to solve its mystery, and the professor said something about a bloodline that will help with its discovery," Michael said carefully, trying not to offend him. "Is that not why you are trying to meet with Lady Farron?" "You have me mistaken, my dear friend. I do not want to woo Lady Farron because her bloodline as an elf will help me with the antique. I fancied her first, and then I found out about the connection between her lineage and the antique. It is a serendipitous discovery, one that made me assured that Lady Farron is the woman of my dreams." Michael could sense no deception from Romeo, only blinded passion. His eyes practically turned into hearts the moment it landed on Lady Farron. "At least, that was my plan right before I saw you in person," said Romeo, kneeling towards Lady Farron. "Now that I've seen you in all your wonder, I realize that I do not need the antique at all. Our offspring will be wonderful no matter if they inherit the secret of the antique or not." Michael was glad that Romeo wasn't having any nefarious thoughts about Lady Farron's blood. He truly was just a lovesick fool. "Ahem, if you have no need for the antique now, then may we obtain it from you?" "The professor wants me to study its contents," Michael said, taking the opportunity presented to him. Romeo immediately gave an enthusiastic nod. Of course. Not only do I owe you a tremendous amount, but I also want to contribute to the reconstruction of history. I have followed Professor Lichtenstein's work for quite a while now and admire his tenacity to his life's goal. His fortitude is nothing to scoff at. That's why I was glad when Lady Farron's letter mentioned that he finally took on a protégé like you. The Draconian may not seem drunk anymore, but his words sure were boisterous. Soon, everyone gasped as Kyo's true identity was finally revealed. Professor Lichtenstein's protégé. That professor. I thought he was a hermit who didn't even speak to anyone. I heard that he even refused to tutor kids from conglomerates. But now he has a protégé. Those words were authenticated by the similar shock and surprise that were painted on the conglomerates' faces. They knew Professor Lichtenstein, having heard of his achievements and his lauded reputation from their seniors all their life. They'd all heard of his aversion to teaching, with his standards so impossibly high that not even the Eyes Vanderbilt could convince him. "Brother, so you are a historian. Not just any run-of-the-mill kind, but one that is studying under the greatest historian this world has ever seen." Jadon couldn't help but look at his new friend with adoration and excitement. As it turned out, Kyo was no ordinary character. His position was so highly sought after that no one even thought it was possible. Yet he did. Now, no one was wondering how he was able to attract the attention of Una Montgomery. He was the professor's protégé. Professor Lichtenstein held a similar status in the world as Zir Montgomery. They weren't people who were able to dominate the economy of the world like Eyes Vanderbilt, or master the mystic arts like wizards, or command a weapon like the Heavenly Knights. They were ordinary people, who became a pillar in the world's balance thanks to their unique ability or knowledge. Professor Lichtenstein was so aptly titled because his knowledge and expertise in the ancient era was so extensive that some say that he is the only connection the world has to the long-lost golden time of the world. Without him, humanity may never ever get to find out what happened back then. But now, it seemed that he isn't the only one. He took on a student. "Una, you never told me your little boyfriend has such an important background." Neytiri excitedly shook Una's shoulders. But Una herself had no idea as well. She stared at Michael, her eyebrows raised as if asking him for more information. He could only give her a silent look saying, "I'll tell you later." Then finally, Romeo Flameheart looked at everyone and bowed his head. "I am terribly sorry for being late once again, ladies and gentlemen. But I'm afraid that I am going to have to leave you all again, as I am to attend to the needs of my beloved and my benefactor." A huge gust of wind and ability power suddenly surged out of the besotted red-haired draconian. It was so powerful that it caused those around him to stagger backwards, their feet almost leaving the ground entirely. Then, right in front of everyone's eyes, Romeo's body started to convulse and bulge, his bones seemingly growing far too fast out of his body. Red scales started to emerge out of his skin, slowly covering the entirety of his body's surface area. And it continued to grow as Romeo's body expanded to thrice his human size in just under a few seconds. Michael raised his hands, feeling the pressure assaulting his face. Then, the wind subsided, the spiking pressure starting to wane and stabilize. Instead of an explosive Dow heart pressure, it was now more akin to a mountain. Humongous, all-encompassing, and rooted to the ground. Now, Romeo Flameheart had turned himself into a giant red dragon, his wingspan almost long enough to cover an entire football field. Then, with his scaly and bony head, Romeo turned towards Michael and gestured, "Lady Farron, benefactor, hop onto my back. I shall take you to my tower for you to claim the antique that is rightfully yours to study." Romeo unfurled his bat-like wings and laid it on the ground, creating a sort of gangplank that would allow them to come aboard. Lady Farron carefully stepped on and managed to climb atop to the dragon's back. It seemed to have been perfectly adapted to create a suitable place for multiple people to sit inside, like a recessed floor complete with couches on all sides. Michael took one step on Romeo's wing and stopped in his tracks. Then he turned around and faced Yuna. "Come," he said to her. Yuna jolted slightly, not expecting such an invitation from him. She was used to Michael always going off on his own, completing missions, changing the world, and doing everything else without needing any help. He was always like that. That was probably one of the reasons why the two of them had such a large gap in between them. But now he was offering her to go with him. She wasn't just being sidelined. She was being asked to come with him without her even asking him. "Are you going to take my hand or not?" he asked her. Yuna smiled. "Took you long enough," she said. And with excitement in her steps, she took his hand and hopped on board the red dragon. And without any more hesitations, Romeo flapped his giant wings, causing an even greater pandemonium on the ground, toppling down trees and causing a great dust storm to assault everyone left in the party. By the time the dust settled, everyone looked towards the empty space in the middle of the forest, still surprised about everything that happened tonight. Many people were still left in complete disbelief. Many even began to doubt that this even happened at all. But there was one thing for sure. Kyo was not a name they would forget. He turned from a nobody into a man of interest in everyone's eyes. In the midst of being in the presence of conglomerates, he didn't even cower even once. He outshined them all. Michael, Yuna, and Lady Farron hung onto anything they could grab as they felt the furious winds blowing past them. They couldn't even see anything as they went through a thick collection of clouds in the skies. But then finally, they broke through, letting them see the magnificent starry skies in all their glory. "How are you all feeling over there?" Romeo's words echoed out into the open skies. He didn't need to fly up this high, of course. It was all in an attempt to impress his beloved. And somehow, his grandstanding seemed to be working quite well. Lady Farron glanced at the previously unseen beauty of the world from up above with wonder and amazement in her eyes. She would have never have seen this in her life if it weren't for Romeo. Feeling awkward that he was intruding on their date, Michael turned towards Yuna. And as he did, he saw her just staring at him. Then, she stretched out her hands, touching his cheeks, before removing his mask. Finally, she saw Michael in his whole visage. "There. That's better," she said with a smile. A small blush emerged from Michael's cheeks, before he turned away from Yuna. "What's better? My hair's all jumbled." He tried to fix his hair, but the air kept brushing past his head. That's what happens when you're atop a dragon soaring through the skies like a private jet. The air tends to be stormy. Yuna chuckled. Whatever, she said. It wasn't really about his looks that she wanted to see. She wanted to see him. Romeo, aren't you going to land soon? He asked, subconsciously trying to fix his curly hair. But then, he realized he didn't have curly hair. Not anymore, ever since he reincarnated to this world. But aren't you enjoying our double date, benefactor? Double date? Then, he turned to Yuna, trying to gauge her reaction. But instead of being repulsed at the thought, she instead fixed her hair behind her ear and kept quiet. Some say that silence was a positive answer. Michael didn't know. He didn't want to assume. He cleared his throat. Ahem, then maybe a few more minutes. Finally, Romeo began to descend from the starry skies, down into view of New Sparta. He headed straight for the center, where the Draconians' towers were located. Their territory was the only one that was placed smack dab in the middle of all the four quadrants, showcasing their importance to the beastfolk race in general. Eventually, he began circling down a specific spire, which was conspicuously painted red with lots of hearts etched onto its very surface. The other dragon towers were designed in a way to show their imposing nature. It was silent, but demanded attention and respect from any who wanted to see it. The fact that it was so tall that it reached the skies made everyone subconsciously look up at them in awe. But Romeo's tower was completely different, incongruous to the others. All of his idiosyncratic features were present on its design. His boisterous personality, his eccentricity, and his romantic tendencies, all depicted onto this tower like a vandalism of his life. Romeo then hovered on top of the romantic red tower, before his wings stopped beating and his lumbering body fell onto its side. His four giant limbs immediately grasped onto the very surface like a lizard. Then, a magical resonance bearing directly from inside the tower beamed towards them like a signal. Hang on tightly, Romeo warned, before some sort of magic warped through his entire body. And the next thing after that, Michael found himself standing on solid ground, with Yuna and Lady Farron right beside him, with an equal look of confusion written on their faces. "Welcome to my dragon tower," Romeo said, appearing right in front of them in his human form. "Whoa," Michael said, covering his eyes from him. Instead of his armor plate, Romeo was now wearing a red silken robe that was draped over his naked body. His hairy chest and a large part of his legs were out in the open. And if he moved even slightly, anyone would be able to see his privates. "What?" Romeo asked, completely clueless. "Ugh," Lady Farron said, shaking her head in disappointment. She couldn't believe that she actually considered his proposal just because he showed her the night sky. "Do you mind wearing another set of clothes?" Michael said, with one of his hands covering his eyes and the other covering Yuna's eyes. "What's wrong with this?" "Everything," Romeo exasperatedly sighed. "But humans are so picky." "Fine. Is that better?" Michael peeked through his hands, seeing Romeo's new clothes. He was still wearing that admittedly comfy-looking robe, but now he was wearing it over his scaled naked body. He was half human and half dragon now, with a seemingly different body composition. So now, there was no chance for his privates to accidentally be revealed. It was a compromise. "I guess," Michael said, now opening his eyes to scan his surroundings. Romeo's room was very lavish. Lots of decorations, most of them of his own face. Paintings of his visage littered the walls, his pillows having gold embroidery of his name, as well as Lady Farron's name, which weirded her out. It was very colorful. Michael wouldn't be surprised if Romeo took inspiration from modern art museums in his previous life, done by some abstract artist who had a penchant for splashing paint around. "Like what you see. This can all be yours, Lady Farron, if you accept my proposal. Your face will be added to my collection of masterful paintings right here. I'll commission your own luxurious and opulent chair matching mine. And," as Romeo described a future, which Lady Farron would call gloomy, Michael scanned the entire room and searched for a certain artifact. And just as he thought, his eyes landed on the corner of the room. A giant bone leaned on the wall, in between a wooden cabinet and a life-size sculpture of Romeo's human form. Somehow, this piece of artifact was in no way discordant to the room. It was just as weird and as eccentric as the rest of the decorations. "Can I?" Michael wanted to ask permission to touch the antique, but Romeo was far too busy trying to convince Lady Farron that his taste in furniture was actually fashionable. "What's so special about this thing?" Una asked. "It's a bone from a mythical beast from the ancient era. The professor said that it contains the secrets of that bygone world." She leaned in from his side. "So it's true that you're the professor's protege?" He shrugged. "Kinda. I never knew you were interested in history. Certainly not one that is able to impress the Professor Lichtenstein. Did he really make you his protege?" There was jest in her tone. She just wanted to tease him, but he puffed up his chest and nodded. "Of course." She smiled, raising her eyebrows. "Really? Then show me what made you so special." And before she could finish her words, Michael touched the bone. For a brief moment, the bone glowed and subsided just a fraction of a second later. Then he turned back towards her. "Want to see me do it again?" "What just happened?" Una asked. She knew that something occurred, but she just didn't know what. Somehow, when Michael touched the bone, something truly bizarre happened. An invisible shockwave emanated out into the room, lasting only for a few fractions of a second, before disappearing entirely. This strange and enigmatic power came directly from the bone. Una was sure of it. That brief, incandescent glow was hard to miss. Not only that, but once Michael released his touch from the bone, the power hidden inside it was suddenly released out into the world, like a pressure cooker letting off its steam. It had only happened within a few seconds and vanished entirely. Michael had completed the obelisk's test in record time. What had happened? Well, Michael didn't know why, but he was somehow extra motivated to complete this obelisk task at an even faster time than before. When he touched the bone, he felt another prick in his finger as the ancient antique tested his blood for that certain quality that it was looking for. And once it had verified Michael's uniqueness, his ability to wield all 8 mana and create unity, his soul was suddenly transported into that island surrounded by nothing but a dark chasm. The island looked completely identical to the first one he'd been to. The differences were minute. And if it weren't for ChatJK5 pointing out the differences in the layout and the chunks of debris from decrepit ancient structures, then he would have thought he arrived on the same island he'd been to before. But once he looked out into the open darkness surrounding the island, he saw another floating structure in the distance, which seemed to coincide perfectly with the island he'd been to before. This meant that this island truly was the second one he'd seen before. After finding this out, he didn't tarry any longer and searched for the obelisk. He found it in the middle of the island, surrounded by floating black debris. With his experience to guide him, Michael did the same thing that he did before. He looked at the hidden writings on the obelisk and followed its instructions, touching it with his unity and his ability power. A similar prismatic beam shot out from its tip before the tests commenced. Thankfully, it was the same one as before. He just had to verify his mana control by shooting all 8 mana elements towards their designated targets. After that came the next test, the Unity creature. Now, this test gave him a run for his money the first time he'd tried it out. But he already knew its moves even before it made them. He summoned his mini drones and began fighting the Unity creature, defeating it in just a few seconds of time. Then, once it was dying and slowly losing its structure, he came in and began to reconstruct it using his own mana, creating another Unity clone for himself. After that, the second Unity creature arrived. This time, it had ability powers to use. Of course, since he knew that Unity creatures only copied ability powers, he simply refused to use one and he defeated it as easily as the first one, earning him another Unity clone. Then, the final test came. And this time, the test had changed. Instead of the usual 3 Unity creatures, the obelisk now sent him a whopping 6 entities to fight. It seemed to have sensed how easily he'd been beating its test and decided to throw a wrench in his plans. Now, he would have cried out for an injustice, but he actually didn't mind it at all. With the 2 new Unity clones by his side, he was able to defeat all 6 Unity creatures in just under a few minutes of time. His mini drones truly helped a lot during this time, as he was able to bombard them with Unity guns before they could even make a move. Then, he claimed his rewards, using the carcasses of the Unity creatures to create another batch of his clones. In the end, he obtained 8 Unity clones from this test. He decided to name them as Foxtrot, Golf, Hotel, India, Juliet, and Kilo, following the NATO alphabet naming convention he'd set up with his first clones. 8 Unity clones kneeled in front of him, showing their deference to their new master. Finally, he had new replacements for his phone manufacturing business. After Alpha and Bravo were upgraded to become faux nascent spirit cultivators, the production of Unity power sources had truly crawled down into a halt. He was very backed up on orders, making him very reluctant to take on more orders, despite how much money he wanted to earn. But now, with 8 more factory workers, he could finally amp up the production and release all the orders that everyone had been waiting for weeks now. Of course, if people found out he was using clones made out of Unity for such a mundane task, they'd think him crazy, to which he'd aptly respond, "Everything was worth it for sand dollars." Anyway, Michael then began to search the entirety of the island for the reward. The last time, he received a truly powerful tesseract that was able to connect Unity constructs to any other Unity constructs regardless of distance. Of course, he was pretty sure there were other more important uses for the cube, but for now, he was using it for the creation of the internet. Now, he didn't expect to receive an inheritance of the same value as the tesseract, but he at least expected something. But as it turned out, there was none. After all that testing was done, Michael was left with nothing but empty space. There was no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. He really wanted to write a scathing review on whoever created this obelisk test for such a letdown. But he knew that the creators of such a thing were already long dead. Anyway, he didn't come out of the obelisk with nothing. He at least got more Unity clones out of it, with the added value of getting to show off in front of Una. All in all, from the point when Michael touched the bone, transferred his soul into the obelisk island, and returned back to reality, less than 10 seconds had passed. It seemed that time moved completely differently inside the island. He spent about 10 minutes completing the test, and only 10 seconds had passed in the real world. This was why, from Una's perspective, things happened almost instantaneously to the point where she didn't even know that something had changed. Michael had locked in, as they say. He defeated those Unity creatures with ease and precision. He didn't know why, but he felt like this was the best performance he'd ever done. His pride was on the line. He didn't want to seem like a loser in front of Una. This gave him a boost to all of his abilities and concentration. What just happened? Una asked him. "I did it," he said. "I'll show you later." Still perplexed about what exactly happened, Una turned silent and nodded. She knew Michael had a lot of secrets that he wouldn't want to tell even in front of his closest allies. Michael then turned to Romeo. "Sir Romeo, thank you for your generosity. I have gathered enough information about the antique to report back to the professor." Romeo whipped his head towards him in surprise. "Really? That fast? I guess you're not the professor's protege for nothing. Care to discuss your thoughts or your findings?" Michael pursed his lips, realizing that he neglected to actually study the antique. He wasn't actually a historian, after all. Thankfully, ChatJK5 had his back. She flashed him a close-up image of the bone's surface, which was inundated with seemingly random cut marks. Of course, he knew that this was actually a language from the ancient era, which only the professor was able to decipher. And ChatJK5. The tests are numerous, skill and luck are required, find them all, inherit it all. ChatJK5 could only translate a few of the words that were written on the bone. A mixture of age and missing knowledge contributed to ChatJK5 unable to decipher the entire text except for a few phrases that were easy to guess. The tests are numerous. He repeated the text out loud for everyone to hear, which surprised Una even more. He could actually translate ancient text too. "I see," Romeo muttered to himself, showing an uncharacteristically serious countenance. He actually seemed to be ruminating on the meaning of the text instead of being besotted by thoughts of Lady Farron. "The tests are numerous. Does that correlate to the numerous bones out there?" Romeo said. This surprised Michael. "More? Are there other bones?" The draconian lover boy nodded. "Quite a few, young man. I know of acquaintances who have one under their collections." As far as Michael heard, only 2 had been discovered. Even the professor thought so. You're confused, Romeo chuckled. But that's just the nature of us draconians, you see. We hoard every valuable item, boast about incredible relics, and keep rare treasures to ourselves in secret. I publicized my acquisition of the antique because in truth, I wanted to attract the attention of Lady Farron. Knowing how hard it is to crack the secret, I made the inheritance of the bone the least of my priorities. And it worked. You wanting to bone caused you to seek out Lady Farron. And you, my dear friend, are the only ones to succeed in convincing my beloved to talk to me. Michael stayed silent. So there are other antiques? Weight, skill, and luck are required. Does that mean that some of the antiques contain inheritances and some do not? If that was the right interpretation of the text, then that would mean that Michael got extremely lucky with the first antique that he obtained. That one contained the tesseract, which made him falsely believe that all antiques contained the same reward at the end of the test. The fact that this second obelisk test gave him no antique gave credence to that theory. Whoever created these tests wanted their successor to try their luck on all antiques. Not just one. Some would contain world-changing artifacts, some would not. It was all in the luck of the draw, which the creator seemed to put a heavy emphasis on. And that last part. Find them all, inherit them all, what does that mean? Would there be a prize on the person who was able to complete the tests on all the antiques? Do you think you'll be able to get me an audience with those acquaintances? I would like to study their antiques, he asked. Romeo pursed his lips. That would be hard, even for me, benefactor. As you might have guessed, I do not have the best reputation when it comes to draconians. I do not think a recommendation from me would do you any good, only harm. That was tough luck. Can you at least tell me who they are? This seemed to have put Romeo in a bit of a pickle. With how much they want to keep their treasures to themselves, I am sure that they would not take kindly to me sharing their secrets. So as much as it hurts me to say, I cannot fulfill your wish, benefactor. Another stroke of bad luck. With no lead to the next antique, Michael won't know where to go after this. Ahem, if you tell us, then I'll agree on a second date, Lady Farron suddenly interjected. Filrog the Mighty has won. He's a draconian that prides himself in his strength, but he's very insecure about his scales. Find a way to take advantage of that and he'll show you his vaults. Then we have. Romeo Flameheart immediately began spilling the beans about the secret identities of the antique hoarders. He began listing names at a commensurate rate. He couldn't be stopped. And that's all of them. But I'm sure there's more, so if you give me more time, I'll find out about them. Is that enough? Michael thanked Romeo for his information. Though he should really have thanked Lady Farron, as she was the only one who could have made him become such a chatterbox. Tomorrow is the official start of the lunar celebrations. I am sure that at least one of those people I mentioned will attend to witness the archery competition. I shall point them out to you if it's possible, Romeo offered. That would be helpful, Michael replied. Lady Farron then turned to Michael. Unfortunately, I will not be able to attend myself due to some business that I have to attend to, but I will send some elves to help with the competition as we discussed. Of course, since it was an archery competition, who should he have asked aside from the beastfolk race famous for their ability to draw a bow? He was sure that Shiina would be able to take care of the lower bracket involving magnetics in the 1st to 5th stage. But the brown-blood werewolves had no one to send out in the upper brackets. That was where the elves came in. I shall text you the details, Lady Farron said, flashing her mobile phone subconsciously. What's that? Lady Farron froze in her spot, unable to answer. Such a peculiar-looking metal object. A brick? Why does it have glass on it, and how is it glowing like that? Romeo Flameheart could feel his innate draconian hoarder gene start to flare up. Whenever he was staring at something that was unique, rare, and valuable, he immediately wanted to take it for himself. Some even say that this instinct that the draconians had were veritable parameters that predicted when something was truly of value. And right now, this phone was activating this instinct of his like blood on water. Is that how? Yuna gasped to herself. She immediately recognized the design of the object as one of those vintage keyboard/trackpad phones back in her previous life. This is a phone, Lady Farron explained. It is made by the Reborn company and has all of these features. She began to introduce the apps to Romeo, who watched the screen with bated breaths as it flashed and changed as if it was magic. Except, it wasn't. It was more akin to a reflection on water, but with a lot more clarity and with not a reflection at all. Are you telling me that this phone can communicate with other phones? Michael nodded. Precisely. Sergio, you are a part of this Reborn company, are you not? I am. Romeo kneeled in front of him, surprising Una and Lady Farron. For most people, this gesture seemed like nothing more than an excessive form of respect or even veneration. But when put into context the culture of Draconians, then it was a completely different thing. For Draconians to kneel and show submission to someone was akin to someone voluntarily chaining themselves to a wall and becoming someone's pet. Of course, this was an exaggeration, but Draconians treated it with the same seriousness. I, Romeo Flameheart, am willing to become a loyal steed for you, Sergio, and the Reborn company. Michael, completely taken aback, was left speechless. A steed? Like a horse? It wasn't until Una explained it to him did he finally get what Romeo was trying to say. He wants to be in an alliance with you. They use the steed terminology because it's supposed to be an uncomfortable affair for a Draconian. The fact that he is willing to say that shows how much he takes this seriously, she explained. Why? He asked Romeo. Draconians have a keen sense, Sergio, and I believe that allying myself with you and this Reborn company will be the best choice I will ever make, Romeo said with ardent fervor. Michael wanted to question his logic, but realized that it was actually in character with Romeo's romantic tendencies. Without even meeting her, Romeo fell in love with Lady Farron and pursued her with excessive zeal. And now, he seemed to have seen something in this phone that made him fall in love with the company. Wow, I guess a Draconian's instinct is kind of like my golden nose. I mean, I'm not going to turn away an alliance from a Draconian. Michael shrugged. Great. Now, would it be at all possible for me to obtain a phone like that? Romeo said, his entreating eyes glistening like a dog's. Since he had just obtained 6 more Unity clones, Michael was more confident in taking orders. Sure, he said. Each phone costs. But before he could even say anything, Romeo immediately lunged at Michael and shook his shoulders. I'll take it. I will pay you $1,000,000 sand. Michael's eyes widened, wanting to say something but was once again interrupted. But I want mine to be completely unique. I want it to conform exactly to my standards of romanticism. I think that $1,000,000 sand will be enough to fulfill that promise, don't you think? Sure, a completely customized phone needed a lot more work, but he was unsure if it was 100x more worth than a normal phone. Still, when it came to rich and eccentric clientele, it was less about the price and more about the fact that they could afford it. A bragging right. So if Romeo wanted to severely overpay for a phone, then it was his decision. Michael wouldn't deny such a gift. I want a phone that shows my complete and utter dedication to my beloved, my sweet and wonderful Farron. In short, Romeo wanted a phone that could only communicate to one number, Lady Farron's number. His phone could only talk to her phone, and only her phone could talk to his. Lady Farron shook her head in exasperation. If you waste money on such idiotic things, then I am afraid I cannot be with you. In the end, a compromise was made. Romeo's phone ended up having a customized wallpaper and case dedicated to Lady Farron. Amazing! Even my sister will be envious of such a unique treasure. After dealing with the eccentric Romeo Flameheart, Michael, Lady Farron, and Una all went back home. Of course, Romeo offered his beloved a place to sleep in his tower, but she declined, making an excuse about her responsibilities in the elven village. Michael accompanied Una back to her place, which was located on one of the only human settlements in New Sparta. As part of the conglomerates and the upper echelon, she was given her own bungalow house in the boundary between the upper quadrants. So see you tomorrow? He asked her. Yes. I'll be waiting, she said, tucking her hair behind her ears. Then, silence permeated between them. Michael didn't know if he should leave or not. Una still hadn't entered through the door. He didn't know if she was waiting for him to leave as well, causing the two to be trapped in a cycle. Hey, I was just kidding, she said. About what? My tantrum. I'm going to be Reborn's arbiter, she decided. If you'll have me. Of course, he replied. I'll always want you. Despite the night blowing cold air through New Sparta, Michael felt quite warm and comfortable during this time. Una seemed to as well, seeing as there was a hot blush on her cheeks. Goodbye, she hurriedly said, turning around and slamming the door behind her. This left Michael a little bit shocked, not knowing what he did wrong. Soon he left, and Una slid down from the door, her back leaned against it. Her heart was beating through her chest, a smile forming on her face. Whenever his face flashed in her mind, she couldn't help but smile. The next day, the rumors about the historian Kyo were immediately being spread around every circle. The fact that the famous professor of the ancient era actually took on a student was more than enough for people to be surprised to the point of disbelief. But then, that story was supplemented with the fact that Kyo actually had allies with all 5 beastfolk races, and people quickly wanted to dismiss it as a myth. Of course, if there weren't multiple sources that witnessed the whole thing with their own eyes, then nobody would believe it. And these were not normal people. These were youths with a considerable background. The legacies were one of them. Once Alaric confirmed the story, nobody could declare it as a lie anymore. Now, there were a lot of things to be discussed because of the Kyo incident, but perhaps one of the most important pieces of information being disseminated was about the eccentric draconian, Romeo. This self-proclaimed romantic was famous for a reason. He himself was a powerhouse when it came to physical strength and wealth. But so were the other draconians. The reason why Romeo was infamous was because of his last name, Flameheart, or more specifically, people were interested in the draconian who shared his last name. She held an importance that related to all draconians themselves. She held an authority mandated by the Dragon Queen herself. Of course, because of her position, many people wanted to create connections with her. However, it seemed that being eccentric was carried down the Flameheart lineage. She was famous for having weird tastes for items and treasures, and no ordinary one could please her. Even sand dollars, drops, or even nascent spirit armors couldn't satisfy her. That was why most people gave up on searching for her directly. They instead chose to focus on his brother, who she doted on as if he was her own son. Now, Romeo was eccentric himself, but not as much as his older sister. So, people tried to please him in the hopes of getting to his older sister. No one has been able to achieve that. That was until yesterday. Because of that, the name Kyo was quickly spread around New Sparta as a person of interest. Even a certain blind old woman was intrigued by his feats. Even a certain orc holding a spear was interested in meeting him. Meanwhile, Michael, the subject of all the discussions early in the day of New Sparta, started his day relatively slow. Following his routine, he immediately transported himself into his drone's subspace, immediately heading towards the isolated rooms so that he could check on the progress and refill the water tanks. Holding a coffee cup in his hands, he yawned as he looked over the computer screen showing the CCTV footage for all 8 Darkwood farms. His eyes furrowed, seeing nothing but a dark screen on each one. Then, as his sleepiness waned and his mental faculties refreshed, he finally realized what he was looking at. It's done, he screamed out, almost spilling his coffee. Excited, he immediately headed for the door, pushing the first floor on the elevator-esque controls. Then, he entered into the isolated room, finding himself staring at a grand collection of intertwined vines spiraling up to the top and spreading to the ceiling. The Darkwood had finally matured. It's ready for harvest. Of course, he didn't let his excitement get ahead of him. He first followed all the protocols on how to harvest the Darkwood, carefully prying the actual item from the vines and making sure not to rip out any branch before that. And as he carefully ripped out the last intertwined vines from the Darkwood, he yanked it out of the tree and held it in his hands. It was perfect. Yes! He exited out of the room and pushed the second floor, before harvesting the next Darkwood. He continued this harvesting spree until he had all 8 crops in his hands. If he were to sell these to the elves, he would earn a whopping 1.6 million sand dollars. But if he installed these Darkwood onto mithril compound bows and sold it to them as a set, then he'd be able to sell them for $500,000 a pop. That would be 4 million sand dollars in total. Finally, Michael could harvest Darkwood and reap its rewards. And it came at the perfect time as well. With this new influx of money, he'd be able to buy enough Godforge pieces to basically reach the 9th stage realm many times over. In fact, he'd be able to buy Godforge pieces for the Dragonborns in advance. With 4 million Godforge pieces, he could buy anything. I guess I should visit Jadon now. The talkative golden retriever masked man that he met in the ballroom ended up as part of the only company in New Sparta who was willing to sell as many Godforge pieces as anyone wanted. Hopefully, his company would end up giving him a discount. But of course, before he left, he made sure to plant more Darkwood in the isolated rooms so that it would be ready again this time of next month. Then, he summoned his Unity clones. 6 blobs of prismatic lights emerged out of his feet, before splitting off into 6 different paths. This prismatic light then began to meld and form into perfectly identical facsimiles of himself, all kneeling towards him in deference. Of course, he decided to change their faces and their bodies so that they had no similarity to himself. Then commanded them to begin the production of Unity power sources. They sat down in a meditative state, with prismatic light slowly gathering at their palms. And while they were working, he himself became busy with fulfilling Romeo's customized phone. After an hour or so, the products were ready to be delivered. He then summoned one of his mini drones to do the job. Meanwhile, Yuna found herself waking up to a very pleasant morning. The sun's rays shone warmly over her window, and the birds were singing their songs. Yuna knew that the reason for her well-being wasn't because of these perfect conditions. It was because of yesterday. She could only label it as a perfect reunion, one that reignited her desire and passion to become stronger. She didn't think there could be anything that would make this day any better. Duck, duck. A gentle rapping came from her window, snapping her out of her reverie. She pulled back the curtains, wondering how someone was able to knock on the 3rd floor of her house. But then, what greeted her was not a person or an animal of any sort. It was actually a product of her previous life. A drone. A smile formed on her lips as she recognized the handiwork. Only he could create something like this. She quickly closed the curtains, fixed her bed hair, and made herself presentable before she finally opened the window. The metallic drone barely uttered a buzz as it flew inside her room, making her a little bit embarrassed. She hoped the camera on the drone didn't capture the messy corner of the room. Tucking her hair on her ear, Yuna looked up at the hovering drone. "Michael, can you hear me?" She squirmed in place, heart beating. "Hey, listen if you're free." But just as she looked up at the drone, it was gone. She looked at the opened window, breeze billowing the curtains, and saw the drone disappearing in the distance. Her jaw dropped. He left, just like that? Not even a hello? A frown formed on her eyebrows. Once again, she was left wondering to herself, not knowing where he went off to. She thought they made such great progress last night. "Humph, let's see if you're still so cold once you need my help," she said, sulking to herself. She gloomily sat down on her bed and felt something on her side. It was a tiny wooden box, one with a pretty white ribbon wrapped on top like a Christmas gift. The drone must have dropped this while she wasn't looking. Eyebrows loosening, Yuna took the box into her lap with excitement. As she untied the bow, a card suddenly slipped down into her feet. She picked it up and immediately, the smile returned to face. It smelled like him. "Hey Yuna, it's Michael. Just a little gift to show my appreciation for you. Hope you like it." Such simple words. Yet somehow, it was like a giant hearth that melted the ice, freezing her mood. She didn't even know what was inside. It didn't matter. Just the fact that he was giving her a gift with no reason at all made all of the misgrievances he did melt away off her mind. "TSK, I'm letting you off too easily," she chuckled to herself. Finally, she opened the box. It was an object she was very familiar with in this word and the previous one. It was a phone, the same one that he showcased last night. Except, its design was distinctly different from the normal one she saw Lady Farron use. There were intricate etchings and designs innately inscribed onto the outer edges. Its theme would look like gibberish to the people of this world, almost alien. But for her, it was not only familiar, It was dear to her. It was her emblem, Yuna Kim, her identity before she reincarnated. It showcased her animal symbol, her favorite note, her star sign, everything she liked. This already was a very thoughtful gift. But that wasn't the only thing he gave her. She took the phone from the box, and a small white fox keychain dropped, dangling from its side. A small gasp escaped from her breath. This wasn't just any keychain. It was one that held important significance. It was made out of wood, painstakingly carved by hand. She knew because it wasn't perfect. It had a lot of imperfections born from a nervous hand. A few marks too deep and a few too shallow. Not only that, but she knew that it wasn't a one-to-one replication of the one she had from her previous life. It was just slightly different, as if someone made it based entirely off of memory. But somehow that made it all the more perfect. He remembered. She muttered to herself, taking the keychain into her chest. Once Michael finished his deliveries, he immediately teleported himself back to New Sparta, in the recovering village of the elves. There, he met up with Lady Farron, who was mired with lots of paperwork and busy elves revolving around her. She was so occupied that she didn't even notice his presence. In fact, none of them did. Ahem. Oh, Kyo. Her eyes widened with excitement as she saw Michael, as if she finally found an excuse for a little break. Leave us alone, please. I have business to attend to with our benefactor. The busybody elves looked at Michael with reverence, but still shook their heads. Lady Farron, these paperworks cannot be delayed any longer. If we pass it on soon, we'll be penalized by the entirety of New Sparta. Apologies, Venerable Kyo. Would it be at all possible for you to come back at a more opportune time? Lady Farron quickly interjected. What was the reason for your visit anyway? Is it in any way life-threatening? If it was, then it would have convinced these hawk-eyed elves. Not life-threatening, no, Michael answered. It's just about these items that I want to sell to you. A large circular shadow in front of his hands, and a moment later, compound bows began to rain down into the floor. Silence. All the elves in the room stopped what they were doing and stared at the pile of compound bows. Darkwood too. Their initial surprise was quickly overtaken by an even bigger shock. These weapons were all endowed with Darkwood as well, making them a perfect weapon worthy of becoming the elves' national treasure. I just wanted to sell these to you, but if you guys are too busy then, we'll buy it. They all simultaneously shouted, shaking the whole acacia tree. The elves were very easy to talk to. It didn't take long before Michael received his chest containing 4 million sand dollars. Who could blame them? Right now, only Lady Farron and Lyra wielded these impressive weapons, and it had already improved their effectiveness by more than twice. But with this influx, they could finally arm their soldiers with these compound bows. The elves were so excited that even Farron's adjutants completely forgot about their important paperwork. They all watched as 8 of their most formidable warriors hit a target at twice their normal effective ranges. And deeper too. Thank you, Lady Farron earnestly said. No problem. You paid for it. She nodded. And we will continue doing so. I have already reserved millions of sand dollars in our treasury for your products. This excited Michael. Oh well, care to spend a little bit more, he asked, flashing his phone. In the end, Michael sold them another 200 units, totaling to 2 million sand dollars. All in all, he earned 6 million from this brief visit to the elves. Michael exited out of the elven village with a huge smile on his face. Both parties were extremely satisfied with the transaction, which was what made it all the better. Once again, he had become a millionaire. He couldn't wait to spend it all. Now, on to the Thunderfoot Company, he said to himself. But then, after a few seconds of thought, he stopped in his tracks. How do I get there? As talkative as Jotun was yesterday, he didn't mention anything about his company at all. Now, he knew that most human companies settled on the outskirts of the New Sparta bulwark, so he at least had a lead on where he could find them. And with his multiple drones scanning the entire skyline of the city, he'd be able to eventually find them at least. He just had to keep his ears open for Jotun's incessant profession of his unrequited love for Aerith. But just as he was about to do that, he suddenly realized something. He didn't have to do that. Naruto? Sasuke? Are you there? A second later, two gigantic shadows emerged out of the wedges in the new Sparta walls. An orc with thick, gray fur appeared on the left, and an orc with spiky, pepper-colored quills appeared on the other. "At your service, Lord Michael," said the Orcupine chieftain with zeal. "Your wish is my command," said the Orcanine chieftain with an even ardent tone, as if trying to outdo the other. It had been a long time since he called onto the two shadow orcs. He practically hadn't interacted with them ever since he entered Metropolis. But that couldn't be helped. Metropolis was filled with a lot of powerful people. People with magnetic abilities. The shadow orc's penchant for snooping around would only land them in trouble. Even their talented and innate stealth skills wouldn't work on those guys. Still, that didn't mean they were entirely obsolete. They were very instrumental in the steady and unrelenting expansion of the Reborn company. While he was pioneering new lands in Metropolis and here in New Sparta, his people back in the nation of Reborn were steadily building the foundations for the expansion. They built roads, infrastructure, and everything else that the Rebornians were privy to. By his estimation, it wouldn't be long before the quality of life in the lower royal continent became comparable to that of the nation of Reborn. And it wasn't just large places like Angora City, Neo-Orcus, or Batroc Town. It included every territory in the intervening locations from the parched lands all the way to Metropolis. The Reborn company made life comfortable for them, at least in the King's region and a part of the Lower Queen's region. And it was all thanks in part to the Shadow Orcs. They were the silent pillars that made sure everything worked as planned. Whenever there was a bandit camp intending to plunder and reave resources from a territory thinking that the Reborn company wasn't there to protect it, the Shadow Orcs were there. They solved a problem before they could even rear their ugly heads, quelling rebellions, usurping warlords, and appending political strife. You name it, they did it. They were so good at their jobs that Michael wasn't even aware of such problems. He was only clued in once it was solved, which made him think that the problem wasn't that big in the first place. But he was wrong. The warlords and marauders that they fought against had armies almost as big as a nation. Of course, most of their numbers were ordinary mortals with no ability to wield magic at all, but still, it was very impressive that these shadow orcs were able to defeat armies with 10 times their number, all under the silent night, leaving no survivors. "Are you guys busy?" Naruto, the Orcanine chief, shook his head fervently. "For you, Lord Michael, we are always available." Sasuke scoffed. "Yes, he is available all the time, Lord Michael. But that is only because my orcs have been doing all the heavy lifting." The two glared at each other, lightning clashing. "I know you guys are busy with the expansion, but have you guys done any work in New Sparta? We have just finished creating a serviceable information network," Lord Michael said Naruto, flexing his shiny, shimmering werewolf-like fur. A basic information network consisted of spies and agents deployed around every single public and semi-private area. This included the thoroughfares in between the quadrants, as well as most of the human settlements outside New Sparta walls. This did not include places where there was increased security like the Beastfolk's territory as well as some of the more powerful companies. They had ways to detect stealth using abilities, which the Shadow Orcs couldn't circumnavigate around. We would have finished this a lot sooner, but there were a lot of unexplainable gaps in New Sparta that were hard to infiltrate, Sasuke mentioned, his quills subconsciously rising. "It must be because of ersatz. They have a stronghold here, so it makes sense that they have some security and precautions in place for people wanting to prod around." "Don't worry about those," he assured them. "Just play it safe. Anyway, that's not what I summoned you both for. I just need some information about a company. Thunderfoot. Heard of them?" Both orc chieftains nodded. "Very much so, Lord Michael. We have had daily reports regarding them. They are a very popular bunch." Michael didn't doubt it. "Can you tell me where they are?" An instant later, a tenebrous shadow emerged from the ground, forming a 3D, black map of New Sparta. "They're here, Lord Michael. We have some shadow orcs set up there so you can simply teleport to them for ease." Michael nodded, before thanking them for their service. He really should be making use of their talents more often. "That's all for today. Good work." The two shadow orcs kneeled in deference. And just as he was about to teleport, he turned back to the two and said, Keep your ears peeled. I'll summon you again a little while later for some gifts. Michael emerged from an unseen shadow of a wall. He looked down at where he came from and nodded at the shadow orc who provided him a place to transport to. Then he took stock of his location. On his left was a large and dense gathering of tents and cabins stretching across the flat plains. On his right was the unassailable bulwark of New Sparta. This temporary human settlement was so huge and attracted many opportunists that it was basically its own city at this point. There were residences, plazas, markets, and even entertainment establishments like taverns and circuses. He set his eyes onto one of the biggest tents in this district. This was one of the only few that could actually be called a house, being made out of stone and brick. Thunderfoot, the giant, inscribed, metal plate on the front couldn't be missed. And with lots of foot traffic going in and out of the building, Michael realized that finding them would have been a lot easier than he thought. He merged with the crowd entering inside, finding himself in a temple-like environment. Lots of wooden pillars, curved overhanging roofs, and a richly cultivated environment that would have felt serene, if not for the hundreds of people walking around busily. It actually did remind him of temples back in his previous life. The ones that were filled with tourists, at least. As he followed the crowd, he was led to a reception area that had a very thick line of people queuing around. He stealthily employed his drone, going around hundreds of heads in the line. Then, he saw the reason for the overstacked guests. The receptionist. Well, the lack of one. What's going on? Where's the people in charge around here? Complained one of the people at the front of the line. I've been waiting for 4 hours now. Well, tough luck, bud. I've been waiting for 6. This is ridiculous. I'm out of here. Though the tough guy said those words, he didn't actually leave the queue. He just hoped others would be galvanized to do so, lessening the line. Michael didn't want to wait for hours too, so he quickly left the queue and walked around to explore the area. Jadon could explain what was happening. He closed his eyes, using his innate supreme talent to sense the world around him. Immediately, a slew of light mana signatures appeared in his sixth sense. Each person was unique. If he could hone in on Jadon's mana, he'd be able to find him in the near vicinity. Searching. Found. His sixth sense zoomed around the Thunderfoot Temple compound, bypassing the thick crowd, going through the sliding doors, and through their private quarters. There, he saw Jadon among a couple of other people. Strangely, the first thing he noticed was that every single person in their compound was in this room. Like a family gathering or something. He didn't know what they were doing, but it seemed that there were a lot of passionate discussions going around. Wanting to snoop, Michael deployed his main drone. It flitted around the crowd, phasing through the walls, and eventually reaching the meeting room just far enough so that the drone's microphone could pick up on the conversation. He didn't want to go too close. There may be nascent spirit magnetics there who could sense the drone. What do they want? Did they give a price? They haven't yet. Since he couldn't see through the walls, he didn't know who was talking. We must find them. This is detrimental to our progress. Those bastards. Who are they even? Why have we never heard of a company like this before? If they don't want money, then why have they done this? Purely out of spite? For destruction? Their motives are inconceivable. Michael listened in closely on their discussions. He couldn't hear some of the finer details, but he did hear enough to form a temporary conclusion. The Thunderfoot Company is in trouble. Something or someone was taken from them by an unknown entity. It looked like they tried to negotiate the return of their property, but the thieves have yet to respond to any of their attempts, which was the reason for the frustration going around the room. That was basically it. They discussed different options for retrieval, but it was either impossible to do or too costly. They simply couldn't settle on a single decision, devolving the conversations into needless arguments. Eventually, one of them remembered that they still had a business to uphold, so the meeting was forced to an end, and the members of their company resumed their posts. It wouldn't be long before the reception desk would have a receptionist. But Michael didn't focus on that. He focused on Jadon, who gloomily walked through the halls of their temple with a dour expression on his face. He dragged his feet along the wood, absent-mindedly passing by other people. Michael took this chance and took off, jostling himself through the crowd and slipping past the empty security doors, before eventually seeing Jadon in front of him. "Hey," he called out. "Churin?" Jadon finally looked up, his face squinting as he looked at Michael. "Me?" Michael chuckled. "There's no one else here, right?" Confused, Jadon walked up to Michael with a wary expression on his face. You can't be here, wait. You look familiar." It took a few seconds before Jadon's eyes widened. "You're your KEO." Michael was surprised Jadon figured it out so soon. After all, both of them were wearing masks last night. The only reason Michael knew it was him because of his mana signature. But Jadon had nothing to go on. "How'd you know?" "I have a good nose for powerful people," Jadon replied, studying Michael's face. "Is that really you, Keo? You're much younger than I thought. And wait, why are you here? How did you get past our guards?" "Shout it, why don't you?" Michael said, covering the talkative guy's mouth. "I'm here to buy some Godforge pieces." Jadon raised his eyebrows, before nodding. "How much?" The sudden sounds of footfalls coming from the corner startled Jadon, causing him to push Michael towards a deep recess in the wall. They hid there for a few seconds as the Thunderfoot employees passed by. Jadon wiped the bead of sweat on his forehead. "What was that?" Jadon looked through the corner, making sure no one was there before answering Keo's question. "Sorry, outsiders are not allowed in our compound right now. Especially because, you know what, it's nothing." Michael could tell that Jadon wanted to let out his frustrations about the incident that was currently embroiling their company in a giant oven. But somehow, he was able to restrain his very talkative mouth. "Anyway, what was that again about buying Godforge pieces?" Not wanting to pry, Michael let the obviously sensitive topic pass. "I wanted to buy some Godforge pieces, but saw that there was a very long line in your reception area." Jadon exasperatedly sighed. "Yeah, I know. Truthfully, as much as I want to brag, our customers usually aren't that fervent. But today is the start of the archery competition, as you may remember, so a lot of them are trying to empower themselves at the very last moment thinking that they could achieve better results. But who are they kidding? Surgery would require weeks of recovery. But whatever. Of course, we're busy ourselves as we're participating in the competition too. But something else came up, so right now it's just a perfect coalescence of bad timing causing such a clogged queue." From Jadon's words, it seemed that this problem of theirs only popped up around midnight or very early in the morning, just in time for the lunar celebrations. Now that could be a total coincidence or it could be a pre-planned nefarious plan. He didn't know yet. "It's good that you sought me. You would have had to wait half a day before you're able to buy Godforge pieces. Come with me. I'll speed up the process," Jadon said, guiding Michael away from their private compound and back towards the entrance. There, they were met with a lot of Thunderfoot employees bowing 90 degrees as they apologized for the wait their customers had to go through. They bowed even lower as they saw Jadon coming towards them. Eventually, they reached near the entrance and Jadon immediately took a hard right, going towards one of the doors that led somewhere only employees were allowed. "Not the reception area?" Jadon shook his head. "Our customers are already angry enough. I can only imagine their wrath once they find out someone cut the line. Let's go to the warehouse directly and I can help you with your transaction." But just as they were about to enter, a figure flashed in front of them, blocking them from opening the door. "Young Master Jadon, and who is this young man?" "Oh, Jasper, what are you doing here? Isn't a butler's job supposed to tend to my father's business?" Jadon said with nervousness, his eyes furtively glancing at the half-open door. Jasper eyed at the two of them with his keen, narrow eyes. "Especially Michael. He's entrusted me to make sure that no more strangers enter our establishment." Jadon, knowing the lead butler of the Thunderfoot family to be the most incisive of all of them, pivoted to telling the truth. Lies would only get them in trouble with this guy. "Listen, Jasper. This guy here is Keo. He's a friend I made at the soiree, and he's here to buy some Godforge pieces." Hearing this, Jasper's suspicious eyes softened. "Now, can we enter the warehouse?" Jadon tried to push through the butler, but was rebuffed by the man's stance. Though lanky, Jadon was like an immovable monolith, I'm glad you made a friend despite your blabbering mouth, young master. But you must know that our receptionists are perfectly capable of handling orders. In the reception area, Jasper said sternly, almost pushing Jot-un back with only his words. But this is a special order. Don't you know who he is? I don't care, young master. Even the venerable Alaric Goldstone can't be given any special advantages. He's Kyo. Like I said, no one. Professor Lichtenstein's protégé. The one I talk to everyone about. Jasper started, his eyes bulging. The prof him? Awe and disbelief was written on the butler's face. Ahem, I stand corrected. My apologies, Sir Kyo. I didn't know I was standing in the face of an esteemed person such as you. In such cases, I am allowed to give you special privileges. This does not include entrance to our warehouse, but I can retrieve the Godforge pieces for you instead. How much will you be purchasing? Michael, satisfied with this compromise, opened his mouth to say something. But Jot-un interrupted him with a frantic expression on his face. Wait. Both looked at him, confused. Can't you allow us inside just this once? Kyo has some sensitive circumstances for his purchase, right? Jot-un looked at him expectantly, eyes furtively glancing back and forth to Jasper. He wanted Michael to go along with this ruse. As for why, Michael didn't know. Yeah, actually, I'm hoping to buy a lot of Godforge pieces. Like a lot. See? How many kilos can 7 million sand dollars get me? See? Say what now? Michael nodded nonchalantly. You heard me. 7 million. The two Thunderfoot guys stared at Michael with wide eyes and an open jaw. Was he serious? Say 7 million, Jasper muttered, gulping. Jot-un immediately pulled Michael to the side, whispering, what are you doing? That's way too far-fetched. Jasper won't believe that without proof. You should have thought of a more mundane excuse. Michael looked back at him with reproach. And why would I do that? I really want 7 million sand dollars worth of Godforge pieces. A slight chuckle came out of Jot-un, but seeing the silence and seriousness in Michael's eyes, he realized the truth. 7 million. You really want to buy that much? Hundreds of eyes immediately turned towards them. Hearing millions would have attracted anyone's attention. Most of them immediately turned their heads away, disinterested. Millions? They must be talking about gold coins, which was impressive for normal people, but tame in the context of New Sparta where everyone was in the top 1% of the world. The fact that they were talking about sand dollars didn't even cross their minds. Any other denomination would have come up first. The number of sand particles in a handful, the number of fishes in a lake, etc. But definitely not sand dollars. Venerable Kyo, are you telling the truth? Jasper muttered. Yes, I am serious. That's the reason why I came here in the first place. Jot-un, you bragged about selling as many Godforge pieces as you can. Now's your chance to prove it. Both Jot-un and Jasper knew that the Thunderfoot Company was the only company capable of selling large amounts of Godforge pieces. But 7 million? Even they didn't think they could sell that much in one single transaction. To prove his intention, Michael summoned his shadow in front of their feet, before a treasure chest emerged from the tenebrous darkness. The chest opened with a click, showcasing an almost overflowing mound of sand dollars inside. Both of them were blinded by the sight. Jasper immediately slammed the chest shut before any other customer saw such a sight. Now, people here usually weren't prone to violence, but the tantalizing sight of millions of sand dollars would definitely motivate some people to act nefariously. He didn't want to burden that on Kyo, who had now proven his worth to be a VIP customer. I have verified your wherewithal, Jasper said, trying his best to stay calm. I can't believe you have that. Jasper covered the guy's mouth, causing his words to come out muffled. That's too much. Does being a historian really pay that much? Michael didn't answer, giving no indication as to how he earned his money. On the other hand, Jasper acted with propriety, not asking any questions and simply doing what a butler should do. Serve. Venerable Kyo, with that much money, you will be able to purchase 700 kilograms of Godforge pieces. Ahem, I won't be able to carry that much by myself, so I hereby mandate you to enter into our warehouse. Jasper opened the door behind him, guiding Michael and Jot-un inside. At least in there, Nobody would be able to hear their conversation. Michael was led inside what looked to be an underground giant mining space. It didn't look like the temple at all, with dark granite stones surrounding them from all sides. "Please follow me," Jasper said, walking forward with an oil lamp mysteriously in his hand. With the butler walking on forward, Jadon took this chance to drag Michael behind to ask him some questions. "You didn't tell me you were rich. You're practically a conglomerate." "Well, you're kinda right. You also didn't tell me why you wanted me to lie to Jasper." Jadon pursed his lips, looking forward to seeing the butler already far off ahead of them. "Truthfully, I wanted to talk to you alone. And this warehouse is the only place that is completely free from surveillance." "From your enemies?" "No, from my father. He doesn't want anyone outside of the family knowing about our circumstances." Michael raised his eyebrows. "Is he talking about the incident they were talking about earlier?" In the distance, they heard the sound of crackling as the lambent light of a giant fire from further down the tunnel lit the entire place a warm orange. Jadon walked forward, and Michael followed behind. "Something was stolen from us this morning," Jadon confessed. "I can't tell you what it is, but it is vital to the continuation of our company. Without it, we would slowly degrade into obscurity." They continued walking, coming closer to the end of the tunnel where Michael saw a bright light almost blinding his view. "Who stole it?" "We don't know. They moved like the shadows, disappearing out of our sights before we could even catch up. They struck us hard and fast, bypassing all of our security like it was nothing. They seemed to know all of our patterns and routines. This was definitely planned months before this." As Michael listened to Jadon's explanation, he couldn't help but feel that it was very similar to a recent event. The elves, the vandals, a sudden siege. Could the ersatz have attacked the Thunderfoot Company? But why? "Our family is currently doing everything they can to retrieve this object," Jadon said, his doubt betrayed by his eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" Jadon stopped just as they were about to exit the mining tunnel. Then he looked at Jadon. "I've always been special. Perceptive, they called me. I always know when someone can solve a problem that is afflicting me. It's weird. Some kind of prescient ability," the priest said. "It's like I could see how much a person would be able to affect the future, like a storm brewing in the skies. And when I saw you enter into the soiree, I saw something I have never seen before. A super typhoon. Calamity. I've never seen anything like it. From then on, I knew that there was something special with you. I just didn't know it. And it wasn't until this morning that I realized why my ability showed me that vision. I need your help. I think that you're the only person that can help our family retrieve that object." Michael stared at Jadon, completely shocked at the man's revelation. He immediately looked at Jadon's identity screen again. Jadon. Realm. 6th-stage body formation realm. Ability power, perceptive eye. This ability power allows its user to sense the future effects of someone's power. When Michael first saw Jadon's ability, he thought it only allowed him to see attacks ahead of time. But as it turned out, it also worked as some kind of prophetic vision. "You want me to help your family?" Michael asked. "Yes, I think so." "How?" Jadon stuttered for a little bit before saying, I don't know. But I feel that you're someone with special abilities. The fact that you can so casually purchase 7 million sand worth of Godforge pieces is proof of that. I'm certain that being a historian doesn't pay you that well." Michael had to hand it to the guy. Jadon was perceptive, despite his unserious and talkative nature. In truth, Jadon probably went to the exact person who could help them solve this problem. If Michael's guess was correct, then ersatz was behind this heist on the Thunderfoot Company. It made too much sense. The ersatz company's life goal was to eradicate everything there was to do about the ancient era. And the Thunderfoot Company was contributing to exactly the opposite of that goal. They were distributing and selling Godforge pieces, something that, according to Katarina, was instrumental in recreating the conditions in the ancient era. So, it was only natural that the ersatz did something to disrupt their business. But it's still not for certain, he reminded himself. I don't even know what the ersatz stole from the Thunderfoot Company. I don't even have a single clue on how I'm going to retrieve it, or if I should even do it. What was stolen? Jadon opened his mouth, but chose not to say anything instead. If I don't know what was stolen, I won't be able to find it. You understand that, right? Frustrated at himself, Jadon nodded. I know, but it's just too sensitive. This involves the entire Thunderfoot family. Young Master, Venerable Kyo. Just then, Jasper's voice called out from the end of the tunnel, forcing their conversation to a halt. Ugh, fine, I'll tell you. But I think it would be better to show you. Jadon walked forward and Michael followed behind him. They both entered into the bottom of a mineshaft, with hundreds of meters of excavated stone walls surrounding them from all sides. Welcome to our warehouse, Jasper bowed to Michael, the light from his oil lamp illuminating the thousands of soil mounds lined up on the ground. It looked like a graveyard. These soil mounds were about 3 feet tall and 6 feet in diameter, and they littered the bottom of the mineshaft in perfect rows and columns. What is this? Jadon cleared his throat. This is where we store our Godforge pieces. Michael opened his drone vision, suddenly seeing the entire abandoned mineshaft with blinding orange light. Underneath these soils, he could see ability power just waiting to burst out into the open and release the purifying white fire into the world. Wait, how are they not destroying everything they touch? Is that what the soil is for? But it's just ordinary soil. How is it not burning? Only Damascus steel or mithril could contain the holy and destructive white fire that the Godforge pieces unleashed. Other metals or organic materials would simply be incinerated into their base elemental mana atoms, with the only exception being human hearts. Wait, Jadon nodded, awkwardly nodding his head. Yep, you're seeing it right. There are corpses under those mounds of soil. Michael was so blinded by the ability power that the Godforge pieces were emanating, that he didn't even notice what was surrounding them. They were human bodies. Now, before you say anything, we didn't kill any of them, Jadon said immediately before a misunderstanding arose. They're already dead, and we purchased these cadavers for a very reasonable price, like, for science. But why? Michael wondered. With your resources, you could easily purchase container boxes that can store Godforge pieces. It relates to the secret of the Thunderfoot family. Truthfully, we are. Jasper started, immediately warning the young master from saying too much. It's okay, Jasper. You can trust Kyo. He's the one that's going to help us retrieve the key. The Thunderfoot butler still wanted to say something, but Jadon immediately began to explain. In truth, we are descendants of an ancient family, one that stretches back to the ancient era. Michael raised his eyebrows. So you're related to ancient humans? But aren't we all? Jadon shook his head. Well, you're right. But most of everyone's history's lineages have been erased during the Great Cataclysmic Event. But not us. We are the only ones who were able to keep a record. This was a tremendous revelation. He couldn't believe that such a normal, run-of-the-mill company turned out to have such an important connection to ancient history. So you know your great-great-great ancestor? Michael asked, half-joking. Yeah, I do. He was a farmer for a royal family, but that's not important. It's not just our historic lineage that is preserved, but also our heirlooms, our family secrets. Our ancient ancestors left for us a great inheritance, one that allowed us to obtain as many Godforge pieces as we want. It just requires Su drops. Michael frowned, completely confused. Huh? So you can obtain as many Godforge pieces as you can in exchange for Su drops. What does that have to do with the cadavers buried in soil? Jadon's face twisted into a grimace. It's very hard to explain in words. Jasper, can you please take out the lamp? Jasper's eyes bulged. There was a vehement refusal in his gaze. Young master, I sincerely hope that you know what you are doing. Our family has kept this secret for thousands of years without anyone knowing. We didn't do that by telling strangers about our heirloom. But Jadon shot back a look at Jasper. Trust me. Who do you think figured out how the lamp worked? Me, right? With those words, Jasper had no response. It was only recently that they were able to figure out how their heirloom lamp worked. And it was all because of the young master's unique instincts. All right, Jasper acceded. He raised his hand, making some hand signs as he used his ability power to release the hidden defensive mechanism inside the mineshaft.